Welcome, you miserable ingrates. Welcome to the You Deserve Better podcast, a show by estranged kids for estranged kids. I'm your host, the other son. We are here to share stories about healing from childhood trauma, often undiscovered until later in life. When I had my own awakening experience just a few years ago and discovered others going through what I'd been through, it was the first time I really felt less alone. The first time I really felt understood. The first time to have that empowering validation that we're not the crazy ones. Today, to share their story with us, we are joined by Janet. Janet, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with your gender identity, please.
I am female.
And let's get right into when you realized about your childhood trauma, which, again, it's late in life for a lot of folks. How old were you when you had that realization, and how did that come about? Was it sudden or gradual for you?
It was a mixture of sudden and gradual because I feel as if I've one of those kids who like grew up kind of committing everything to memory. I did have a really good kind of like memory for a lot of things, and there were a lot of like memories I accumulated along the way of like that didn't really make sense, but you kind of like file it away, you go on with life,
Right.
and you just kind of like sit with this kind of like discomfort, not really like
Right.
looking at it.
Right.
So
Right.
that was my gradual buildup until I think it was like I was 39, and I was at this point in my life where it was a bit strange because I was finding almost like surrogate parental figures, like people that I looked at and kind of and saw like I wish my mom was like you. And then when I kind of like
Right.
put myself under their wing and started getting abused by them, like verbally abused and treated almost the same way like my mom had treated me, I started wondering, it's like, wait a second, I'm no longer the child I was, and I'm not sure whether getting this treatment um, as an adult is really sitting right with me. And I was age 39. I was going through this with a coworker, someone who was actually my superior. I was going through this experience of this was someone I had seen as a mother figure, but now was getting all this kind of like verbal abuse.
Oh, that's
And
difficult in a workplace too. Geez.
yeah, and sad to say that I found myself in an environment where it was so normalized that I had to go to a friend from a different culture and like explain to her my situation and I asked her because I was really that clueless at that time. It's like I was asking her, "Hey, is this emotional abuse? Does it count as emotional abuse? Getting yelled at and trapped in a room. I've been physically trapped in a room and yelled at for something like 4 hours because I remember, yeah,
Sure.
I
I,
remember
that's how deep.
trying to,
Yeah.
yeah, that's how much I've been brainwashed. That's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
how blind I had been because I remember looking at my watch. It's like 11. I can still catch lunch, and then the next time I looked at it because I was being released, it was like close to 4 o'clock.
I just want to jump in real quick. That reminds me just of a memory
Sure.
from my childhood where when I was a young kid and they were sending me to Catholic school and I was having all these behavioral problems in school, talking out of turn. And I realized now this was attention-seeking behavior that I was never getting the attention from my mother. But anyways, at the time, we were going to have a meeting about my behavior problem. And I remember early in the morning before classes starting that there was a conference and it was me at the table, both my parents who were taking time off of work to be there, all my teachers, and the school principal. And the topic of conversation is, what are we going to do about my behavior problem? And I remember being in that room, and nobody was on my side. Every adult in my life, every
Oh,
authority figure in my life was at that table, all ganged up on little me. And it's one of those things that seemed normal back then. And now I realize, geez, where's my advocate? Who is supposed to be on my team? And when you're talking about this meeting where you're being berated like that, it just reminds me of that. Where's my advocate? This is not right to be like this.
yeah, and I think you said there were a few keywords you said there that I can really connect with, like not having an advocate by your side, and maybe like when you have so many authority figures kind of like ganging up on you,
Mm-hmm.
you do feel because the numbers are so large and they're all against you that you're the one at fault. And that was pretty much the culture I grew up with, where, it's like all the authority figures, all your seniors, all your superiors were usually the ones who are right. And so
Don't even
I
question it.
almost
Don't
had
even question it. They're godlike when you're a kid like that.
exactly. And sometimes it's like it's part of that education system you go through where you're not supposed to like question your betters. You're not supposed to like question
Well, that's a
these
whole other
people who are
topic. Now we
older
could
than you.
right now we can talk about education and so forth. Yes, yes, of course. But
Yeah, but
so
I,
so
I I mean I was deep in that.
back to when you were with your
And
coworker then, and was this sort of the breakthrough moment where you sort of made that connection then to childhood and what was going on then?
yeah, because I had consciously treated her as this kind of like replacement mother figure, and now that I was like really getting it, getting that verbal abuse, and where she was blaming me for how things were not going right, the business wasn't running, and she was putting everything only on my head. When I was like, hang on a second, some of the decisions had been made by you, and I was just, just following orders. But it was all falling down to me. And I really had that moment of, I don't think how I'm being treated is right. But then some of the things that I was responsible for, maybe I had messed it up enough that I deserved like 4 hours of getting yelled at. So
No,
that
no
was
one deserves
really
that.
like,
No one deserves that. And
I
you
know that now. Yeah.
right. You talk about mother figure. So I'm guessing that in your childhood that your mother has been the toxic parent, I guess. What is it like your mother, father? What was that dynamic like?
It was easy to kind of single out my mother as the only toxic parent. But actually, what I would say was that both of them were toxic, but my mom was more present. Um, so I mean, I guess it's kind of common sometimes with your with fathers being kind of like the main wage earner in the household. And that was the case in my family, where my father was a workaholic, and sometimes he had jobs which sent him traveling
Right.
for weeks at a time.
My
So the
father had a
main kind
traveling
of,
job too, and he was often absentee. So I'm feeling you on that. Yeah. They
yeah.
were
And then
divorced,
when
but he was often out of town and didn't even do his weekend. So, anyways, please continue.
right. So here was one parental figure that was usually like kind of not there, and then when they came back, it's almost like, is this a blessing or a curse? Because now they're just back and kind of yelling all the time,
Hmm.
or you're walking on eggshells around them. So that was a situation with my dad. And in some ways, maybe because he had so much stress from work, I kind of like gave him that excuse or that defense. I would
Right.
defend his behavior.
Right.
Whereas it was harder to do that with my mom, who was more present and yet neglectful at the same time. I mean, I don't know whether I feel as if maybe being Gen X, and like I'm in my 40s. There was this almost like normalcy around being ignored by your parents.
Uh,
So
Yes. Yeah, and these are generational things. Yeah, certainly within families, I agree with you. That bad parental behaviors are passed down, but there's also cultural things, and the idea that
yeah.
oh, it was fine for us back then, and corporal abuse. Sometimes you watch movies from not even that long ago. I feel like some 70s, 80s, 90s, and there's some moments that may kind of make me cringe, like, oh, that was normalized enough that we would try to make a joke about that in a movie, and now it's like, geez, it's I mean, it seems so obvious now. It's almost like with my denial, things that I didn't see my whole life that now there's just this clarity. What are some
Yeah.
examples from your childhood? Can you think of some specific things that this is something that was normal in my household, thought it was normal, and then later when I realized about my trauma, I can see that, oh wow, that really is dysfunctional. That wasn't right.
Oh, I have so many things. I think it was
It's
definitely
often the small
my
things. It's
mom's.
often the small things.
Yeah, I mean, I felt as if I wasn't able to get my mom's attention most of the time. And it was so bad that I do remember sometimes, like when she started to interact with other adults, because she was, in some ways it was kind of strange. Like, she was a very social person. She would be seeking people to be on the phone with, or she'd be seeking people to visit, and then she'll take me along. But in all these cases, I just felt ignored. And so I know I developed this strange kind of like,
It sounds
oh,
like
if
she was using
mommy's
you like an
going,
accessory, like you were a purse or something.
yeah,
Like she would bring you out
exactly.
when she wanted to look like a mother, and other times she could just put you back in the box and I don't need you today, kind of thing.
Completely. You captured it, like you just hit the nail on the head. Like I only felt visible when we were going outside because all of a sudden other people would acknowledge me, and then she would have to almost like acknowledge me and bring me into the fold as well. Like there was no interaction between us when we were alone at home, but if we were going out and we were meeting, people that
Right.
she wanted to see and she wanted to demonstrate, hey, I'm such a good it, like,
Right.
there was a mom that I knew at home, and there was a mom that I knew that acted very differently in front
Outside the
of other
house.
people.
Outside the house. Absolutely. Night and day
Mhm.
difference. Something else that I realized myself about my mother, the way she would tear into me at home, just
Mhm.
shrieking at me, but she would never do that
Yeah.
in public. Never in public would that happen. And I didn't really make that connection before. And yes, just an entirely different person outside the apartment in just a number of ways. But yeah, that's a big narcissist mother trait is just wait till we get home kind of thing. And
Right.
seem normal at the time, but yeah, behind closed doors. Because when you're little kids, you're not comparing notes with other kids. Hey, does your parent do this? Does your parent do that? You just assume this is what life is like for everybody until I had this. So I was sort of shaken awake myself a few years ago. Um, so I like to close on an up note, and
Mhm.
let's talk about something positive in your life. And frankly, you sound great, by the way. Well, actually, before we get to that, let me ask: Are you
Yeah.
estranged? Are you estranged? And if so, how long? What's the details of that? Are you low contact estranged?
So I'm no contact. I'm NC,
Mm-hmm.
and if I think back about how long it's been about 2.5 years, and
Bravo,
it
bravo.
thank you. I mean, that's about the time I moved out, but I had by the time I kind of like saw through them, I actually like I had a career change and went studying psychotherapy, just trying to make sense of, my childhood and my parents because both of them just were, really toxic in their behavior. So yeah, I had that uncomfortable period for a while of, coming into the information of just how dysfunctional and how not normal that upbringing was, and then needing to heal it and going to all the therapists, but not being able to quite like separate yourself 100% yet.
Right.
So that actually took something like quite a few years before, yeah, 2.5 years ago when I was able to move out. It was 100% cut, and it felt as if all the therapy that I'd done wasn't complete until that severing of that tie.
Oh,
Um,
it sounds so wonderful. I imagine like this heavenly pair of scissors just coming down out of the clouds and just snipping that tie. It's like you're singing on the top of the mountain like Sound of Music. The hills are alive. It just sounds wonderful the way you portray it like that. It's great. It's great.
I mean, I feel as if there was a movie treatment, I'd laugh if I saw that, but it was actually a bit more harrowing. And I think you and I both know that there is a lot of guilt, there is a lot of self-doubt, there is a lot of like that
In cycles,
hypervigilance
though.
of looking over your shoulder, like have I really left it
But
behind?
not all the time,
And I
though.
think,
Not all the time.
yeah,
There's bad days, yeah, occasionally, but
yeah,
there's a lot more good days, I feel like, than bad days now. I wouldn't
it
trade in a second to go back to the deluded life I
same.
was living, before all this.
It gets so much better. If I can leave with anything, I just want to tell people that it gets so much better because I know that kind of that doubt and especially in this in the culture I'm from, it's not the thing to do. It's almost like you're not allowed to save yourself because there's so many kind of like family expectations.
Right. Right.
You,
It's
you
still
know
very taboo.
you
Still very taboo, and even more
yeah.
so we're in other cultures than some cultures even more so. But I got to tell you, I feel like there's a little bit of a shift. I feel like it's starting to come out of the shadows a bit with the success of some other books and some other.
Yeah.
I feel like the stigma is starting to come off a little bit, and I'm hopeful for that because it's still awkward for me when I'm meeting somebody brand new, and the question comes, which is a reasonable question. Oh, tell me about your family. And then it's like,
Right.
there's no really short way to just say, yeah, well, I haven't spoken to them in years. I mean, well, I mean, you can't, just so I totally understand, but I feel like things are turning around. So hopefully that's going to be
Yeah,
continue to be the case.
I agree with that. I do appreciate like the community that kind of like facilitated us finding each other and
Right.
the
Support
community that
groups
you're
very
building
important
around
for
this
me.
podcast
Right.
because it does make such a difference to find other people going through the same thing and having this safe space to talk about it. As opposed to I think what we all kind of fear meeting someone that we're not very familiar with is like how is our family story or estrangement story going to be received. And as you said, I do detect a shift as well, maybe faster in some places than others.
Right.
Um, but I think those people who are speaking up, we're part of that shift. Um, yeah, so I was
We're
really
back on
happy to
that
talk
mountain.
to you.
Hills are alive. We're part of that shift. We're leading the charge. There you go. There you go. Well,
Yeah.
I asked to wrap up on an up note, and I really couldn't have done much better than that. Janet, this was fantastic speaking with you
Oh,
today. I
thank you.
can't tell you how much I appreciate
Yes,
you
I
coming on the
enjoyed this.
show. It was a lot of fun, and
Mhm.
hopefully we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And thank you for joining us. If you've taken something away from this show, then you can support it by sharing with your friends. The You Deserve Better podcast has a Facebook group. Would love to see you there. And by all means, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you would like to be on the show, drop us a line at udbpodcastrules@gmail. You got to do the little fist bump when you say udbpodcastrules@gmail. I am the other son. Let them burn their eyes out.